Dale laughed before the lawyer finished reading. "She gets to jail," he said, sliding a single rusted key across the table like a tip. "Let her rot in it." What none of them knew, least of all Dale, was that the rusted key sliding across that table would one day pull back every other line in the will. The lake house, the savings, the country club deposit. Brooke had been bragging about all morning. He had just handed his mother the one thing in the room he could not afford to give away. And he had done it grinning. Opal Hartley was 74 years old, 3 months past her husband's funeral. In a back office above the diner on Main Street, she sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched her only son sort her whole life into 2 piles, the part worth taking and the part worth a joke. For 40 years she had swept the steps of that old jail every Sunday morning before church. She knew which of the 12 stone steps rocked under a boot. She knew the catch in the front lock that no locksmith in Tansy Ridge had ever once talked into opening. They had appraised the lake house down to the dollar. Not one of them had ever set foot inside the building they were laughing at. The lawyer was a careful man named Mercer, and he kept his eyes on the paper. The residence on Cutter's Lake, he read, the 2 accounts at Blue Ridge Savings, and the pickup pass to Dale Hartley. The property on Old Coalfield Road, the parcel and the structure, formerly the county jail, passes to Opal Hartley. "Passes," Dale said, and looked over at his wife, Eminency. "That's a generous word for a thing that ought to be bulldozed." Brooke Hartley did not look up from her phone. "Is it even worth reading out? What's the county have it assessed at?" Mercer cleared his throat. "The assessor carries the structure at $1. It's been condemned since before either of you was born." $1. Brooke set the phone face down at last and gave Opal a small, bright smile, the kind people use right before they say something they have practiced. "Well, congratulations, Opal. You're a property owner." The radiator ticked in the corner. Outside, a truck went by on Main and dropped a gear at the light. There is a particular arithmetic the grown children of this world get very good at. They can tell you the worth of a lake house to the penny, and never once add up what it cost to keep them in shoes. Dale had it down cold. He slid the key the last few inches so it touched the edge of Opal's folded hands. "Take it, Mum. It's yours free and clear." He smiled. "Lord knows nobody's going to fight you for it." Opal looked at the key for a long moment. It was iron, the old kind, longer than her finger, the rust come up over it in soft orange scales. Her father's key. She had watched him carry it on his belt every day of her childhood. She picked it up. She did not argue. She did not cry, which seemed to disappoint Brooke a little. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer," Opal said, and her voice was steady. "Is there anything for me to sign?" That was all. No scene, no begging. She put the key in her coat pocket, where it sat heavy against her hip, and she stood up slow, the way a body stands up at 74, with one hand on the table for the first 6 inches. Dale was already talking about something else. "So the lake place," he was saying to Mercer. "Lower now, the voice men use when they think the old woman has stopped listening. How fast can we get the title clear? I've got Coburn ready to move on it. He wants to tear the cabin down, put up 4 units with a dock. I shook on it last week." "You shook on it," Brooke said, pleased, "and I put the deposit down at Hollow Creek. The membership committee meets the 15th. She said it the way some people say a foreign city they have just learned how to pronounce. Hollow Creek. 18 holes and a clubhouse, and a man at the gate." Brooke's umbrella, hooked over the back of her chair, cost more than the first truck Opal and Henry ever owned. It had a wooden handle carved like a duck's head. Opal noticed these things. She had spent her life noticing what other people only spent. "Just don't go past your means," Dale told his wife, and laughed at his own joke. Because going past their means on money they did not yet have was the entire plan. "We're not the lake house people yet. Few more weeks." Nobody said goodbye to Opal. She let herself out and went down the narrow stairs to the street, one hand on the rail, the key knocking against her hip with every step. Tansy Ridge sat in a fold of the Blue Ridge, where the mountains came down close on both sides, and the fog took the whole town most mornings until 10. Main Street ran 4 blocks. There was the diner, and Pruitt's Hardware with the seed rack out front, and the brick courthouse with its white clock, and the recorder's office tucked in beside it. And across the square, set back behind a chain that had not held anything in 30 years, there was the jail. The locals called it the rust pile. They said it the way you say a thing you have stopped seeing. Stone walls 2 feet thick, a flat tin roof gone the colour of a dead leaf, 4 barred windows staring out at town that had quit looking back. The county had built a shiny new annex onto the courthouse 2 summers ago, all glass and aluminum, and the new wing came right up close to the jail's lot line. Close enough that the surveyor's stake still stood there in the weeds, a wooden lath with orange tape hammered in to mark where the county's ground was supposed to end. Coburn, the developer, had walked that line himself in the spring. Folks had seen him, pacing it off, looking at the jail, the way a man looks at a rotten tooth. Word was the county wanted the rust pile gone so the annex could grow, and Coburn wanted the lot for the parking. Word was it would all happen soon, once somebody finally settled who owned the useless thing. Now somebody did. A 74-year-old widow with $1 worth of condemned stone and a key in her coat pocket. Opal stood on the corner across the square and looked at it for a while. The wind came down off the ridge and pushed a curl of grey hair against her cheek. She thought about her father. Elias Hartley had been the county jailer for 40 years. A wide, quiet man with a voice like a slow door. He had kept that building the way some men keep a church, swept it, painted the bars, knew the name of every soul the county ever locked inside it, and most of their mothers' names too. When Opal was a girl, she had done her schoolwork at his desk by the window, a heavy oak desk with a green blotter, while her father sat across from her, cleaning his pipe and saying very little. She remembered one evening near the end, when his hands had already started to shake. He had taken her out to the jail, at dusk, just the two of them, and stood her in the middle of the empty cell block and put both his hands on her shoulders. "Opal," he said, "I'm not leaving you the jail, girl." She had been confused. Everyone knew the jail was the county's. "I'm leaving you," her father said, slow, like every word was a stone he was setting down in a wall, the one lock the county forgot it never owned the key to. She had laughed a little because she thought he was being soft in the way old men get. He had not laughed back. He had looked at her until she stopped, and then he had walked her back out and locked the door behind them and never said another word about it. Not that night, not ever. He had been gone 40 years now. And every Sunday for 40 years, while the town slept off Saturday, Opal had walked across the square with a broom and a jar, and she had swept the 12 stone steps, and she had carried fresh wildflowers in past the dead chain, and set them on the green blotter of her father's desk, black-eyed Susans in summer, bittersweet in the fall. Whatever the roadside gave her, she did not always remember why anymore. She only knew that a thing her father had kept for 40 years deserved one person who would not let it go to ruin in the dark. People in town thought it was sweet, in the way they thought it was sad. The Hartley woman and her flowers. They figured it for grief that had simply forgotten to end. They did not know what she carried in her pocket now. They did not know what Dale had slid across a table like a tip. And Opal, standing on the corner with the wind going through her coat, did not know it either. Not yet. She knew only that it was Sunday tomorrow, and there were steps that needed sweeping, and that for the first time in 40 years, the building behind that dead chain was hers, every cold stone of it, to walk into as slow as she pleased. She put her hand in her pocket and closed her fingers around the iron key. She had swept those steps 1,000 Sundays. In 40 years, she had never once gone looking inside the walls her father swept beside her. Tomorrow, with nobody left to take anything else from her and nothing left to lose, she thought that maybe she would. The fog was still in the streets when Opal crossed the square the next morning, the way it always sat there on a Sunday in Tansy Ridge, low and grey between the storefronts so the brick courthouse seemed to float with no bottom to it. She carried what she always carried, a broom worn flat on one side from 40 years of the same 12 steps, a glass jar with a fistful of black-eyed Susans she had cut from the ditch along Old Coalfield Road, the stem still wet and cold in her hand, and this morning, heavy in her coat pocket against her hip, her father's rusted iron key. Nobody was out yet. The diner would not put its lights on for another hour. A dog barked once somewhere up toward Pruitt's Hardware, and then thought better of it. Opal came across the empty square with her slow Sunday walk, past the surveyor's stake with its orange tape gone pale, and she stepped over the dead chain that had not stopped anybody from anything in 30 years, and she stood at the foot of the jail, the rust pile. That was what they called it, the people who had never carried flowers up these steps in the dark. She set the jar down on the bottom stone, and she swept. She had done it 10,000 times, down from the top, step by step, the broom hissing on the cold granite, the grit going off the edges into the weeds. The third step rocked under her boot the way it always had. The seventh had a chip out of the corner where a county truck had backed into it before Opal was born. She knew them the way you know the knuckles of your own hand. When she was done, she stood the broom against the wall, and she picked up the jar and she faced the door. For 40 years she had unlocked this door, set the flowers on the desk just inside, and locked it again. In and out. 2 minutes. A widow keeping a habit. She had never once walked the building. It had not been hers to walk. It had been the county's stone, with her father's ghost in it. And she had been a guest who came on Sundays and left before she wore out her welcome. It was hers now. $1 on the books and every cold stone of it. Hers. She fit the key to the lock. There was a catch in it, an old hitch a quarter turn in, that no locksmith in the county had ever talked his way past. They had given up on it one by one over the years, men with picks and graphite and patience, and every one of them had walked off the porch saying the same thing, that the lock was froze and you would have to drill it. Her father's key knew the hitch. You lifted and you pressed in at the same time, the way he had shown her without ever saying so, and the bolt gave with a sound like a swallowed cough. The door swung in on a smell she had known her whole life. Cold stone, old iron, dust gone soft as flour. 40 years of it, and under it, faint, the ghost of pipe smoke that could not possibly still be there, and was. Opal stood in the doorway and let her eyes come around to the dark. The front room was her father's office, near as it ever was, ever. The heavy oak desk under the barred window, the green blotter cracked and curling at the corners, an inkstand with the ink gone to tar, a wooden chair, a coat hook with nothing on it. Past the office, an iron door stood open into the cell block proper, 2 cells on a side. The bars painted black so many times the paint had gone to ripples like water. The light came in through the 4 barred windows in long grey bars and laid itself down on the floor. She crossed to the desk and set the jar of black-eyed Susans on the blotter, in the ring-worn pail where 40 years of jars had sat before it. There. That was the habit. That was the whole of what she had ever come to do. This morning she did not turn to leave. She stood in the quiet with her hand resting on the cold oak, and she thought she would just look. Just once. A body ought to see the inside of a thing she owned. She picked the broom back up, because a woman feels foolish wandering an empty building with her hands hanging, and she went in through the iron door, into the block, sweeping a little as she went. The way she had swept the steps, because that was how her hands knew to be in this place. Cell 1 was empty to the walls. A bare iron bunk bolted to the stone, a bucket gone to lace with rust. She swept the threshold and moved on. Cell 2 she almost passed. There was a draught in it. That was the first thing. A thin, cold thread of air, moving where no air should move, in a stone box with 1 barred window painted shut. Opal felt it on the backs of her hands. She stopped, and she stood still the way you do when a house says something to you, and she followed the cold with her face until she was looking at the bunk on the far wall and the stone behind it. It was not stone. She saw that now in the grey light, with her eyes gone used to the dark. Behind the head of the bunk, low, where a sitting man's shoulders would hide it, there was a panel set into the wall. Iron, painted the same dead colour as everything else, fitted so close and so long ago that the seam of it had filled with grime and gone near invisible. 40 years she had set flowers 30 feet from it, and never known it was there, no reason she would. You had to be down on the floor of a cell nobody had stood in for a lifetime, with the morning coming in just so, to see that the wall had a door in it the size of a Bible box. Opal got down. It cost her. She put the broom flat on the floor and went down to one knee, with a hand on the cold bunk frame, and then the other knee, the way a body comes down at 74. In stages, with a little sound she did not mean to make. She put her fingers to the seam. The panel was loose. Not much. A hair of play in it, top and bottom. Enough that the cold breathed through. There was no handle. There had never been a handle. Whoever set this had not meant for it to be found by anybody who did not already know. To come down on the floor of cell 2 and put their hands where his had been. She worked her nails into the seam at the bottom, and she pulled. Nothing. She pulled again, and a flake of old paint came away under her thumbnail, and the panel shifted, a grind of iron on iron that went up her arm and into her teeth. She braced her shoulder and she put what she had into it. This small old woman alone in a condemned jail, with the fog at the windows, and the panel came free all at once and nearly put her over backward. Cold came out of the hole like a held breath let go. Opal sat back on her heels and looked at it. A cavity in the wall, 2 foot deep and dark. The stone behind dressed smooth, made on purpose, made to last. And set down in it, square in the middle, sat a box. A strong box, tin gone the brown of old blood, the lid soldered down at the seams in a bead of grey metal. Her father's own hands had run. She had no doubt of it, because Elias Hartley had soldered the diner's coffee urns and half the gutters on Main, and never let a seam of his leak in his life. It was the size of a family Bible, and heavier than it looked when she drew it out into her lap. Something inside it shifted and settled, with a dull, iron weight. She sat on the floor of cell 2 with the box in her lap and her heart going, and for a moment she could not make herself open it. Out the barred window, the fog was burning thin, and the town was starting to stir. Somewhere a truck door slammed. Somewhere her son was sleeping in a bed, dreaming of a lake house that was not his yet, and a country club that would have a man at the gate, certain to the dollar of everything he was owed and the worth of everything he had thrown away. He had handed her this, grinning, like a tip. Opal took out her father's old pocket knife, the bone-handled one she had carried in her coat since the funeral, and she worked the blade along the soldered seam. The solder was soft and old, and it came up in curls. It took her a long time. Her knees ached and her fingers went stiff in the cold, and she did not stop, working the lid, the way she had worked the steps, slow and sure, an inch and then an inch, until the whole seam was parted, and the lid gave under her thumbs and rose with a creak. Inside, on a bed of oilcloth gone stiff as bark, lay 2 things. The first was a key. Not the rusted, friendly old door key in her pocket. This was a different thing. Black iron, cold, heavier than its size. The bow of it worked into a shape she did not know. No lock in the building it could go to that she had ever seen. She lifted it out and held it in her palm, and it sat there like a small, cold weight of years. The second thing was paper, a roll of it, thick, tied with a string gone brittle and brown, sealed at the lap with a daub of red wax pressed with something she could not read. She lifted it out as careful as a baby. The string broke at her touch, just fell apart. 40 years or more of waiting in the dark let go all at once, and the roll wanted to open in her hands, stiff and slow, the paper the colour of weak tea, and the ink on it the brown that old ink goes. She could not read all of it there on the floor in the grey light. Her eyes were not what they were, and the hand was old-fashioned and close. But she could read the top of it, the big letters set out careful and proud the way they made men write a thing in those days, when a thing was meant to stand. A deed. The words sat there plain. Deed of land. And a year under it, written out and figured both. 1898. And down the side, in the margin, in a different hand and a darker ink, pressed so hard the pen had near gone through the paper, somebody had scratched 3 words and underlined them twice. Recorded, not sold. Opal did not know what it meant. She was a woman who had kept a habit, not a clever woman. She would have told you so herself. And the words on the page were lawyers' words and surveyors' words, meets and bounds, and the names of dead men, and a line about a thing called reversion she read twice and could make nothing of. But she knew her father's hand. Recorded, not sold, was her father's hand. The same hard slant he wrote her name in, on the front of her schoolbooks, and she knew that a man does not seal a thing in a wall with solder and red wax and 40 years of dark unless the thing is worth more than the wall. She sat there a while longer. Then she did what she had come to do, and a thing besides. She set the jar of black-eyed Susan straight on the desk on her way out, because Sunday was Sunday, and she took down off the coat hook, where it had hung untouched since the last day her father wore it, his old brown leather satchel, the strap cracked and the buckle green, and into it she put the rolled deed and the cold black iron key, and the empty strongbox too, because none of it was the county's, and she was done leaving things in the dark. The fog had lifted off the square when Opal came back out the jail door and pulled it shut behind her and felt the old bolt take. She stood on the top step a moment with the satchel on her shoulder, a small grey-headed woman in a Sunday coat, and she looked across the square at the brick courthouse, and the white clock, and the low building tucked in beside it where the recorder's office was, closed today. But there was a name on that door, she knew. Asa Tarr, who had clerked for her father as a boy, who used to sweep this very block for a nickel and run papers across to the courthouse, who was the only soul left in Tansy Ridge that might read a thing in that satchel and know whose hand had written it. Monday morning he would be at that desk by 8. Opal Hartley went down the 12 swept steps with one hand on the rail, and she didn't feel 74. She felt like a woman with an errand. Across town, her son was reaching for his telephone to tell a developer the lake house was as good as sold, and he did not know, none of them knew, that the old woman they had laughed out of the room was walking home through the lifting fog, with the whole thing folded in a dead man's satchel against her side. The satchel sat on her kitchen table all Sunday evening. Like a guest she did not know how to feed, Opal made her supper around it, a fried egg and a slice of bread and a cup of tea gone cold while she stared. And twice she got up and laid the deed out flat under the lamp and bent over it with her father's reading glass. And twice she folded it back up because the words swam and the hand was old and her eyes were older, and the lawyer's lines about reversion and consideration and heirs of the body would not hold still long enough to be read. She could make out names. She could make out the year, 1898, set out proud in the middle of the page, the way men wrote a thing when they meant it to outlive them. She could make out, down the margin in that hard black slant, recorded, not sold, underlined twice, the pen pressed so deep she could feel the trough of it under her thumb like a scar, and she could hear her father, plain as the kettle, the way she had not let herself hear him in years. He had said it to her once, on a step, with a broom in his hand. She had been a girl, or near it, sulking because the other men's daughters were left houses and china and good bottom land, and all her father had to leave was a county paycheck and a key ring. He had not laughed at her. Elias Hartley never once laughed at her in his life, which was more than she could say for the boy she had raised. He had set the broom against the wall and looked at the stone building the way a man looks at a horse he has not finished breaking, and he had said, "I am not leaving you the jail, girl." He had said, "I am leaving you the one lock the county forgot it never owned the key to." And she had thought it was just talk, the kind of riddle an old man makes when he has nothing else to hand down and too much pride to say so. She had carried that sentence 40 years the way she carried the broom, without thinking on it, a weight her hands knew and her mind had set down. Now it sat in her kitchen in a tin box with the solder cut, and it did not feel like talk anymore. She slept finally toward morning, in the chair, with her coat still on, and she woke stiff and cold with the grey coming up in the window. And the first thing her eyes found was the satchel. She did not waste the morning. She washed her face and pinned her hair and ate nothing, and she put the deed and the cold black iron key back in the brown leather and buckled it shut. And she went out into Tansy Ridge, while the street lights on Main were still burning pale against the dawn. The recorder's office sat in the low brick wing tucked against the side of the courthouse, down 3 steps from the sidewalk, a glass door with gold letters half flaked away, and a window full of green ledgers behind iron mesh. The light was on inside. It was always on first inside, every working morning of 40 years, because Asatar came in before the town did the way some men go to church, and he was at his long oak counter with his sleeves gartered and his glasses down his nose, when the little bell over the door knocked twice and Opal Hartley came down out of the cold. He looked up, and his face did the thing old faces do when they are glad and sorry at once. "Opal," he said. "Lord, it's early for you. You all right? I heard about the reading. I heard what they—" He stopped himself. "Being a decent man. I'm sorry about Dale. I'm sorry about the whole of it." "Asa." She set the satchel up on the counter between them. Her hands were not quite steady, and she did not try to hide it. "You clerked for my daddy. I swept that block for a nickel a Saturday," Asatar said, and a little warmth came into him saying it. "Ran his papers across to this very office when the floor came up past my chin. Elias Hartley taught me how to fold a deed so the seal don't crack. I could no more forget that man's hand than my own mother's voice. He set down his pen. Why, she worked the buckle. Her fingers were clumsy with the cold and the wanting, and Asa did not reach to help her, which she was grateful for, because it was hers to open. She drew out the roll of weak tea paper, and she laid it on the counter, and she smoothed it flat with the side of her hand, the way you smooth a tablecloth, and she turned it so it faced him. Asatar leaned in over his glasses, and then he went still. She had seen men go still before. She had seen her husband go still the day the doctor came out into the hall, but this was a different stillness, a working stillness, the way water goes flat and hard the moment before it breaks white. He did not touch it at first. He put both hands palm down on the oak on either side of the paper, as if to hold the counter where it was, and he read down the first lines moving nothing but his eyes, and the only sound in the office was the radiator ticking, and somewhere out on Main a truck shifting gears. "Where did you get this?" he said. Very quiet. "In the wall," Opal said. "Cell 2, behind the bunk. Sealed up in a tin in the stone, soldered shut. My daddy's solder." She found she had to stop and start again. There was a key with it. "I never opened that building in my life, Asa. Not the inside of it. 40 years of Sundays, and I never went past the desk. It was in the wall the whole time." "In the wall," he said. Not to her, to himself. He took up the corner of the deed at last. "The way you lift the wing of a hurt bird." And he turned it to the light, and he read down further, his lips moving now on the close old lines. The meets and bounds, the names of dead surveyors, the courses run from a white oak gone 2 centuries to rot. She watched his face and could not read it. Then his finger stopped, halfway down on a single clause, and stayed there, and pressed. "Opal," he said, "do you know what this says?" "No," she said. "I'm not a clever woman, Asa. You know that." "I couldn't make heads of it." "You're a plenty clever woman," he said, still looking at the page. "You just never had to be this kind of clever. Sit down a minute." He came round the counter and got the chair from against the wall, the hard one nobody liked, and set it for her. And she sat, because her knees had gone, and she did not want to fall down in the recorder's office on a Monday morning in front of the only friend her father had left in the world. Ar-Sattar stood over the deed with his glasses in his hand now, polishing them on his shirt without knowing he did it, the way a man's hands keep busy while his head runs ahead. "This parcel," he said, "this ground, the lot the jail sits on. In 1898, your great-grandfather, this would be Elias's grandfather. The name here is Amos Hartley. He held this land, held it clear, and the county wanted it, because Maine was coming through, and they needed a place to put a jail. A square in the middle of town. Now." He set the glasses back on. "What I would have told you, what I'd have told anybody yesterday, what every soul in this courthouse believes, is that the Hartleys sold it to the county, and the county's owned it free and clear 100 and some years, and your daddy was just the man they hired to keep the keys. That's the story. That's what's on every map in that building." "Yes," Opal said. "That's what Dale said. The county's old jail. The rust pile. That's not what this says." Asa-Tar put his finger back on the clause and turned the page so she could see, though she could not read it, and he read it for her, slow the way you read scripture to a child. It says the land is granted unto the county for the use and purpose of a county jail, and for so long as the same shall be so used and kept, and no longer. It says, "Here upon the said use ceasing, or the said building being abandoned or condemned, the land together with all improvements thereupon shall revert to the grantor and the heirs of his body." He looked up at her. "Reversion, Opal. They never bought this ground. They were never sold 1 inch of it. Your family let them put a jail on it, on the one condition that it stay a jail. And the day it stopped being a jail, this land was supposed to come straight back to the Hartleys, to the heirs of the body, to you." Opal sat with her hands in her lap. Out the green ledgered window, the town was waking up. The diner's lights coming on across the square. A man scraping frost off a windshield. The white clock on the courthouse face. Reading 10 of 8. She thought far off, that somewhere across town Dale was likely on the telephone already, bright and early, telling a developer the lake house was as good as signed, and that Brooke had her heart set on the spring social, at a club that had cashed her deposit. She thought about the single rusted key sliding across the lawyer's table like a tip. She found she could not feel her own face. "It stopped being a jail 30 years ago, she said. "It stopped being a jail 30 years ago, Asa-Tar said, "and nobody read this because nobody had this, because your daddy sealed it in a wall. And then last year they condemned it on paper to clear the books, and 3 years back they put up that new courthouse. Annex, the brick one, with the glass front, the one the county's so proud of." He stopped. Something went over his face that she would think about later, a kind of fear and a kind of joy fighting in an honest man. "Opal, go look out that window. The annex, where does it stand?" She did not need to look. She had swept beside it. "On the lot," she said slowly, "next to the jail. On the same." And then she understood, the way you understand a cold draught in a sealed room, all at once and up the backs of your hands. On the same ground. On Hartley ground, Asa Tarr said. They built the new courthouse annex on a reversion they never knew existed, on land that came back to your family the day they let the jail die. Every brick of it, the ground it stands on, was never theirs to build on. The radiator ticked. Opal Hartley sat very still in the hard chair, a small grey-headed woman in a Sunday coat she had slept in, and she did not say anything because there was nothing in her that had words for it yet. Asa Tarr, though, had gone somewhere else. He was looking at the deed and frowning now, not at the clause but at the whole of it, the proud 1898 lettering, the red wax, the heft of the old paper, and at the corner of it where a recorder's stamp would go. He bent close. He straightened. He went back around his counter, quick for a man his age, and he pulled a great green index ledger off the shelf behind him and dropped it open on the oak with a sound like a door. "What is it?" Opal said. "This is the original," he said, running his finger down a column of crabbed entries. "Your daddy's copy, the grantor's copy, sealed in the wall. But there's always two. Has to be. The county records its own. There's a copy in these books, has to be, indexed and bound, or it isn't worth the wax it's sealed with in a court of law." He flipped back a page, and forward two, and back again, and his finger slowed and stopped. He turned to the deed books proper, hauling a second volume down, the spine cracking, the dust of it rising gold in the window light, and he ran the dates, 1897, 1898, 1899. And he turned every leaf between, twice, and his hand came to rest flat on the open page, and he looked up at Opal Hartley over his glasses with the strangest look she had ever seen on a living face. "It isn't here," Asa Tarr said. "What isn't?" "The county's copy. The recording. There's no Hartley grant in this index. There's no reversion deed in these books. 1898. This whole parcel, and the county never recorded its own side of it." He let out a breath that shook coming out. "They took the building and they used the land, and somewhere along the years, they forgot they'd only ever borrowed it, and the one paper that would have reminded them was sealed in a wall in cell 2 with your daddy's solder over the seam." His voice had gone down to almost nothing. "Opal, there is one deed to this ground in the world. One, and it is lying on my counter." She heard her father then, the whole of the sentence, the riddle she had carried 40 years without setting it down to look at. "I am leaving you the one lot the county forgot it never owned the key to." "He knew," she said. "Asa. He knew the whole time. He more than knew," Asa Tarr said, and he took his glasses off and pressed the heel of his hand to his eyes for a moment. An old man, and when he took the hand away, his face had set into something hard and certain, and almost glad. He kept it. He kept it so it couldn't be lost and couldn't be burned and couldn't be quietly fixed by some clerk who knew a county lawyer. He hid the proof in the one building he could promise you'd come to. Every Sunday, he gave you the key that opens the door, and he trusted you'd carry the flowers long enough that one day you'd go in and find the rest. He set both hands flat on the counter again, on either side of the deed, the way he had when she first laid it down, as if the paper might still get up and leave. "The question now isn't whether this is real. I clerked for the man. This is his hand, and that is the county's missing book, and I will swear to both on anything you put in front of me." He looked at the clock on his wall, and then at her, and something in him squared up. "The question is what you want to do with it. Because the commissioners meet in that courthouse Thursday morning, all of them, in open session. On the record." Opal Hartley stood up out of the hard chair. Her knees held her this time. She reached across the counter, and she rolled the deed back up, slow and careful, the way Asa's own small hands had been taught to fold it without cracking the seal, and she slid it back down into her father's cracked brown satchel beside the cold black iron key, and she buckled the strap. "Thursday," she said. Thursday came down off the Blue Ridge, with a cold so clean it printed frost ferns on every windshield from Old Coalfield Road to the square, and Opal Hartley was up before any of it, in the dark, pressing the one good dark dress she had not worn since she buried her husband. She did not eat. She drank half a cup of coffee standing at the window and watched the streetlights on Main go from white to nothing as the sky came up grey behind the courthouse. And at 7:45, she put on her coat and took up the cracked brown satchel by its old strap and walked into town. The diner was lit and warm, and Della Combs was wiping the counter behind the glass. And when she saw Opal pass, she came to the door with a dish towel still in her hand and watched her go, and did not call out. Because some mornings you let a body walk to the things she has to do. The commissioners met upstairs in the courthouse, in the long green room with the high windows and the cold radiators, and the framed photographs of dead men who had sat at that same table. Folding chairs were set out in rows for the public, though the public in Tansy Ridge rarely came, and this morning there were maybe 9 souls scattered in them: a woman with a zoning complaint, 2 men from the road crew, a reporter from the weekly who looked half asleep. Up at the front, the 5 commissioners sat behind their long table, with the green felt top, and Chairman Doss in the middle, with the little wooden gavel, and off to the side at his own narrow desk sat the county attorney, with a stack of folders and a thermos. Dale was in the front row. He had on the good grey suit he wore to closings, and Brooke beside him in a camel coat with her phone in her lap, her thumb moving on it slow. And when Opal came up the stairs and stopped in the doorway, Dale turned and saw her, and something crossed his face that was not quite a smile. "Mama." He said it low, leaning back over his chair so the others would not hear. "What in the world are you doing here? This is county business. You ought to be home in the warm." He looked at the satchel on her arm, and his mouth did the thing it did when he was being patient with her. "You go on home. I'll come by after. I'll bring you something to eat. We're about to get the lake rezoned, and there's no call for you to sit through it." "I'll sit," Opal said. Brooke glanced up from her phone, took in the dark dress and the worn satchel, and looked back down without a word, and her thumb kept moving. Opal found a chair at the end of the second row, near the wall, and Azatar came up the stairs a minute behind her with a flat leather folder under his arm and his recorder's seal in his coat pocket, and he did not sit. He stood along the side by the windows with his hands folded in front of him, the way a man stands who has come to say a thing and is waiting on the room to be ready to hear it. They ran the small business first. The minutes. A culvert on the Mullins Road. A man who wanted a chicken house too close to his neighbour. The radiators ticked, and the reporter wrote nothing down, and Brooke checked the time on her phone twice, and Opal sat with the satchel in her lap, and her hands folded on top of it, and watched the white clock above the chairman's head. Then Doss looked at his agenda and said, "All right, we've got a request for rezoning on the Hartley Lake parcel, Route 6. Mr. Dale Hartley, come on up, Dale." Dale stood and buttoned his coat and went to the little lectern at the front with the easy walk of a man who has done this before, and he laid it out smooth as glass. A developer out of Roanoke, 12 lots on the water, jobs in the building of them, and tax money after. He had the plat rolled under his arm, and he spread it on the table for the commissioners to see, the lake all cut up into squares, and he said the developer was ready to close the end of the month, that the man already had a stake in the ground at the property line and a cheque half written, and all he needed was the board to move the parcel from rural to residential, and the thing was done. He was good at it. He had always been good at the part where he told people what they wanted to hear. "We'll need a motion to set the public hearing," Doss began. "Mr. Chairman." Asatar stepped off the wall. Doss looked over. "Asa." "Before the board votes to move any Hartley ground," the recorder said, "the board needs to see an instrument that's lately come into my office. It's recorded. It bears on county property, and it bears on this very parcel question, and if you all vote before you've heard it, you'll be voting on land the county doesn't understand the first thing about." He came forward to the front of the public rows. "I'd ask the county attorney to follow along with me, because I don't want one word of this to rest on my say-so alone." Dale had turned at the lectern. "Mr. Chairman, this is my mother's doing, and with respect, she's—" He searched for the word in front of the room. "She's an old woman and she's upset about the estate, and she's got herself confused. The jail's hers. That's all settled." "There's no call to drag, let the man speak, Dale," Doss said, not unkindly, and rapped the gavel once. "Asa, what have you got?" Opal stood up. She did it without deciding to, the way you stand when your name is called in church. And the room came around to her, and she crossed the worn floor to the front, and she set the satchel on the corner of the long green table and worked the old buckle with her cold fingers, while every eye in the place watched her hands. She drew out the roll of weak tea paper. She unrolled it flat on the felt and smoothed it with the side of her hand, the way she had smoothed it on Asa's counter, and she turned it to face the 5 men behind the table, and then she stepped back and let it lie there. "Read it," she said, to Asa. "You read it. It's your office." Asa Tarr put on his glasses. He picked up the deed and held it to the high window light so the red wax seal caught, and he read it out into that cold green room in a clerk's slow, careful voice. The granting words, the courses and the distances. The white oak 200 years gone. The name Amos Hartley, the year of our Lord 1898. And then he came to the clause, and he read it twice, once fast and once slow. Granted unto the county for the use and purpose of a county jail, and for so long as the same shall be so used and kept, and no longer. And upon the said use ceasing, or the said building being abandoned or condemned, the land together with all improvements shall revert to the grantor and the heirs of his body. He lowered the page. Revert, he said. The county never bought this ground. Not the jail lot, not 1 foot of it. Amos Hartley let them put a jail on his land, on the one condition it stay a jail. And the day it quit being a jail, the ground was to come straight back to his blood. The county condemned that jail 30 years ago and put it on the books for $1. By this paper, the day they did that, every inch of this lot came home to the Hartleys. The county attorney had come up out of his chair. He took the deed from Asa, not rough, and bent over it under the window, and the room was so still you could hear the furnace knocking down in the cellar of the building. There's more, Asa said. He reached and turned the page a quarter so the attorney could see the margin, where, down the side, in a hand pressed so hard the pen had near gone through the paper, 3 words were scratched. That's Elias Hartley's hand. He clerked these books before I did, and I'd know it blind. He wrote it in the margin of his own deed, the day he understood what he was holding. Asa read the 3 words off the page. Recorded, not sold. Recorded, not sold, the county attorney said, half to himself, still reading. He kept his copy, Asa said. And there was supposed to be a second, the county's own. The board records its own instruments, always has, indexed and bound, or the thing means nothing in a court. I went back through the deed books for 1897, 8 and 9, twice. There is no Hartley grant in the county index, there never was. The county used this land 120 years, and somewhere down the long road of clerks it forgot it had only ever borrowed it. And the one paper that would have set them straight was sealed in a wall in the jail, with this woman's father's own solder over the seam. He looked at Doss. Mr. Chairman, there is exactly 1 deed to this ground in the world. It is lying on your table. Dale laughed. It came out of him the way it had come out of him at the lawyer's, quick and certain. A man who knew how the world was arranged. That's a 100-year-old piece of paper out of a wall. You can't. Hush, Dale, Brooke said. She had set her phone down in her lap. She was looking at the county attorney's face, and Brooke had always been quicker than her husband at reading which way a room was about to fall. The county attorney straightened up. He took his glasses off, and he looked at Doss and the other 4, and he chose his words the way a man chooses where to put his feet on ice. Mr. Chairman, I need to be plain with the board. This appears genuine. The hand, the seal, the wax, the language. It's a fee simple determinable with a reversion, and on its face the condition failed 30 years ago. And if there's truly no counter-recording in our index, and I'll have the books up here within the hour, then the county has no instrument of its own to stand on. He set the deed down very gently, as if it might go off, which means I have to advise this board, right now, that we cannot vote on the Hartley Lake parcel, or any matter touching the Hartley estate, until this is before a judge. Because if this is what it looks like, the estate was inventoried wrong from the start. The jail wasn't worth $1. The jail lot is the most valuable ground in this county. He paused and he said the next part because it was his job to say it. It's the ground the new annex sits on. This building's own new wing. We poured it on Hartley land. The room made a sound, a low single intake. 9 people, and 5 commissioners all at once. Dale's face had gone the colour of the felt. The annex, he said. On the same lot, the county attorney said. Surveyed off the jail corner. Yes. For a moment Dale Hartley did not seem to know he was standing up. Then he turned, fast, and went out into the hall, with his phone already at his ear, and through the tall door you could hear him, the bright voice gone thin, saying the developer's name, saying, wait, saying now, hold on, just hold on. Let me. And then saying nothing at all for a long while, and then saying, lo, all right. When he came back in, he was grey and his collar had got too big for his neck, and he did not look at his mother. The man from Roanoke, it would come out later, had pulled his stake out of the ground at the lot line that same afternoon, and gone looking for cleaner title in the next county over, because no developer alive closes on land tied up in a fight over a will, and a courthouse built on the wrong dirt. Brooke had picked her phone back up. She was not playing with it now. She was staring at the lit screen of it, at some message on it, and what was on it Opal could guess because the club outside Roanoke did not give deposits back, and the spring social was in 3 weeks, and the money Brooke had put down had been money that was never coming, money laid against the lake and the savings and the whole estate they had carved up at that lawyer's table, while they slid an old woman a rusted key and told her to go rot. Doss brought the little gavel down once soft, more to give his own hand something to do. "We'll table the rezoning," he said. "We'll table all of it. Mr. Attorney, get those books up here." He looked down the table and then out at the grey-headed woman standing at the end of it in her funeral dress. Mrs. Hartley. He stopped. He was an honest enough man too, in his way. "We've got a great deal to set right." Opal stepped to the table. She reached out and laid 2 fingers on the deed, on her father's 100-year-old paper, and she turned it square to the chairman. And then she slid it across the green felt to him slow, the whole length of her arm, the way you push across a thing when you are finished holding it, and she did not say one word while she did it. She had carried that gesture 3 days the way she had carried it back from a lawyer's office, in her chest like a stone, and now she gave it back, not to Dale, to the county, on the record, in front of him. Dale watched her do it, and he knew exactly where he had seen it before, and his throat worked, and he looked away. She did not speak to the board about money. She told them what she wanted, plain in the hall after, with Asa beside her, and the county attorney taking it down in a little notebook. The county could keep its annex standing, she said, on the ground it had built it on, and she would not put 5 commissioners and a county full of working people through the courts to tear a building down. But the estate would be opened back up before a judge. Every line of it, the lake and the savings, and the whole of it counted true this time, with the jail lock counted at what it was, and her son's hand on the inventory looked at hard, and the old stone jail itself that her father had kept for 40 years and sealed his proof inside of, that came home to her free and clear, and what she did with it would be hers to say. Dale found her by the stairs while the attorney went off after his ledgers. The others had drifted out, and it was just the 2 of them in the cold hall under the photographs of dead men, and he had his hands open in front of him. "Mama." His voice had gone young, the way it used to go when he was a boy, and had broken a thing and wanted it unbroken. "Mama, I never knew it was, you have to understand. I thought it was just the old rust, I thought." He could not finish a sentence. "We can fix this between us. We don't have to do it in front of a judge. We're family. You raise it up in front of a judge, and you'll ruin me, you'll ruin Brooke. You shook a man's hand on the lake before your grandfather was cold," Opal said. He shut his mouth. "You slid me a key across that table, and you told me to go rot in it." She was not loud. She had never in her life been loud. "I swept those steps every Sunday of 40 years and set flowers on my daddy's desk, and not one time did you come stand beside me, and not one time did you ask me why I went. You thought I was a foolish old woman keeping after a dead building." She looked at him a long moment. Her son, the boy she had raised by herself with a county widow's nothing. "I'm going to let you keep the roof over Brooke's head, because your daddy would have wanted that much, and because I am not made the way you are made. That's the whole of what you get from me. You'll answer to the judge for the rest, and you'll do it without my hand on your shoulder, because you didn't want my hand when you thought it was empty." "Mama, please, go home, Dale," she said, and she went down the stairs and left him standing in the cold under the dead men, and she did not look back up at him, and that was the last soft thing she had for him for a long while. Delacombes had the door of the diner open before Opal reached it, and inside it was warm and full, and the whole place had heard already, because Tansy Ridge is the kind of town where a thing said upstairs in the courthouse at 9 is known at the counter by 10. Della set a plate in front of her that she had not ordered and would not let her pay for, and the 2 road crewmen touched their caps, and old Pruitt come over from the hardware in his canvas apron, just to put his hand flat on the table by her cup, and say, "Opal, your daddy, Lord," and not need to say the rest. She sat in the warm with those people who were not her blood, and ate the first food she had taken since the day before. And it was the first morning in a long time she did not feel alone in it. The county attorney came into the recorder's office that same afternoon, and he did not come alone. He had a younger clerk with him and a hand truck, and on Asa Tarr's instruction, they began pulling the oldest original deed books off the high shelves, the 1800s, the brittle ones, and laying them out on the long oak counter to be checked leaf by leaf against the index, every grant in the county, to see what else 100 years of tired clerks might have let slip through a crack in the bookkeeping, whose ground might be sitting unrecorded? What other family in Tansy Ridge had a thing coming to them that nobody had ever bothered to read? The Hartley deed itself they did not file back into a drawer. By Asa's hand it went under glass, in a flat case set right up on the public counter, where any soul who walked in, worried about their own piece of dirt, could lean over it and read with their own eyes what one careful man's pen had kept safe in a wall for 40 years. Opal signed the old jail over to the county before the month was out, but she signed it on her terms, and they were written into the deed so plain a child could read them. The building was to be the county's archive, its records and its original papers kept there under lock and daylight, where no clerk could ever again seal a man's truth inside a wall and let the years swallow it. It was to stand open to the public every working day, and it was to carry her father's name over the door, and no other, in brass, where the town that had called it the rust pile and forgotten what it was would have to read it, coming and going for as long as the stone stood. They turned the power back on a week later. The men from the county ran new wire and swept out 30 years of dust and pigeon feathers, and they put glass back in the high windows of Cell 2. And on a cold, bright evening, at the end of the month, Opal Hartley stood across Main Street in front of the diner with Della and Asa and old Pruitt beside her, and watched a county man inside throw the breakers one row at a time. By full dark, the windows of the old stone building burned warm and yellow in up and down Main. On the door, a new brass plate caught the streetlight, the Elias Hartley County Archive.